Now, this top section, we're going to ignore for this tutorial because in itself, it's pretty much an entirely different tutorial, as it can get pretty complex. So let's ignore it for now, and I'll explain it in the next lesson. Let's go down here to where we see this LFO section. So LFO stands for Low Frequency Oscillator, which essentially means it's a waveform that is playing but isn't making a sound. Instead, this waveform is actually going to be controlling a certain parameter on our oscillator. This part will be a bit hard to explain using a kick drum because we want a bit of a longer sound so that we can hear what's happening to it. So let's go to our browser and we'll just pick something that's better suited for experimenting with this LFO. So go to your packs folder and open up the legacy packs, go to instruments, choirs, and we'll pick this bottom sample. It's really cheesy, but it's going to let us work with it and we'll be able to hear exactly what's happening with this LFO section. So go ahead and drag that in underneath all your other samples. Close the browser because we don't need that open anymore. And let's open up our settings for this Choir Heaven C6. Okay, so these LFO settings can be applied to a variety of parameters. We can choose which parameter by clicking on it up here. Now, I know I said we're going to ignore this part, but just focus on these tabs right here for now. So we have our LFO right here, and let's say we want to automate our panning, which is the sound moving from left to right. So let's click on the panning tab, and now we'll go back down to our LFO. Once panning is selected, we can start setting up our LFO properties. To hear exactly what I'm talking about, let's first crank up this knob, which is the amount knob. Turn it all the way up. Now, if you hold down a note, you can hear it slowly cycling back and forth between the left and right speakers. If we lower this amount, then the effect becomes slightly less noticeable. If you turn this knob to the right, that means you're going to be changing the amount in a positive way. If you turn it to the left, you're going to be changing it in a negative way. Don't forget that 0 is actually when the knob is pointing directly up. We can also take this a step further by changing the speed at which the LFO is oscillating. So to do this, go to the rightmost knob and turn it either up or turn it down for a much quicker oscillation. You can make some pretty cool sounds by messing around with these, so make sure you give them a shot. The other two knobs, which are pre-delay and attack, also are pretty powerful. Pre-delay inserts space before the oscillator actually starts oscillating. So as we turn it up, we can see this blank space appears. This means that the LFO won't start oscillating until the note has been held for this much time. If you right-click this knob, you can give it a precise time by choosing the number of steps that you want that space to represent. Let's say we want a 4-step delay. So it shortens it down to 4 steps. 4 steps directly corresponds with what is on our step sequencer. Each of these little blocks is known as a step. So now it sounds like this. You can hear there's a delay before the oscillation kicks in. The attack knob works in a similar way, but instead of delaying the oscillation, it just fades it in. Let's turn off our pre-delay, and let's turn up the attack knob. As you can see, it gradually fades in until about right here, where the waveform hits the max amplitude. Okay, let's reset our settings. So once again, just hold Alt on your keyboard and click each knob. And now they're back to the way they were. The last thing to look at with this LFO are these 3 buttons at the top here. With these, you can actually change the waveform of the LFO so it'll sound different. We have our sine wave, which we've been using. We have the sawtooth wave, which is a lot harsher and more buzzy than the sine wave. Lastly, we have a square wave, or also known as a pulse wave. This one is pretty harsh, and it's a lot more like going directly from off to on to off to on. It almost sounds like it's skipping directly from 0% to 100% to 0% to 100%, rather than having a nice fade between the two. Remember, you can change which parameter the LFO is controlling by changing which tab you're on. You can control the pan, the volume, the cutoff, the resonance, or the pitch. You're not limited to just using one LFO. you actually have 5 unique LFOs. So you can actually have all 5 LFOs going at once if you'd like. So we've learned what an LFO does, so now let's go into our Miscellaneous Properties tab. So polyphony simply means how many voices can be played at once, a voice meaning one single note. So that would be one voice. If you click and drag up and down on this max box, you can actually limit the number of voices that are allowed to play. So if I set it to 1, even if I hit 2 keys at once on my keyboard, it's only going to play the single voice. If I set it to 2, I can play 2 voices, but now I can't play 3. Let's go ahead and set that back to the 2 dashes, which simply means unlimited polyphony. Next, let's look at these 2 buttons right beside that box. The top one is Portamento, and the bottom one is monophonic. Monophonic is actually pretty fun to play with, and it's used in a lot of music styles. You'll see what I mean in a second. So go ahead and turn that on. When something is monophonic, it means that only one voice can be played at a time. If you hold one note and then play another, it'll slide between those 2 note values. For example, I'm going to hold C and then I'll hit G. So it sounds something like this. So you can hear it sliding between the 2 values. You can also use this slide knob right beside it to either increase or decrease the amount of time it takes to slide between the 2. So let's increase it a little bit. And we can even push that further. Okay, before this drags on too long, let's look at the final tab, which is our Functions tab. We can ignore this top part for now, because it's just a simple little delay. In a few lessons, we'll go over the mixer in detail, and I'll show you how to add a much better delay than this one. Alright, so let's look down here at this Arpeggiator section. If you don't know what an arpeggiator does, it's pretty cool. When you hold down a chord, instead of playing all the notes at once, it will cycle through the different notes and play them one at a time, depending on what mode you have selected. For example, if I choose this, which limits the arpeggio to only play upwards, it'll sound something like this. If I choose the next one and tell it to only play downward, it'll sound like this. Next, we have our up-down arpeggiator, which sounds like this. And beside that, we have the sticky up-down arpeggiator, which just kind of plays a double note at the top and the bottom. We also have this random mode, which means that it randomly selects a note from within your chord and plays that. So it can sound pretty crazy. If you go down here to this knob that says time, you can change how quickly your arpeggiator is cycling between the different notes. If you turn it up, it goes longer, and if you turn it down, it goes shorter. Let's turn it down quite a bit. As you can see, the arpeggiator sounds really cool, and it's really easy to use. You can also change this gate knob, which shortens the length of each note that the arpeggiator plays. The lower it is, the shorter the note. So if we have it really fast and really short, it sounds like this. Let's reset that for now. This box here, labeled range, determines the amount of octaves that the arpeggiator can play in. Right now, we've limited it to just 1, but if we turn it up, we can hit a lot more notes. Let's change the arpeggio direction to something a bit more melodic, so we'll set it to up-down. And now listen to it on the 3-octave range. If you're not too good at music theory and you don't know a lot of different chords, don't worry, you can just click on this drop-down arrow and it gives you a list of all the different chords as well as all of the different scales. For example, if we want to play a blues scale but you don't know the notes, just select blues and then press a single key on your keyboard. So that covers the majority of the sampler's properties. We didn't touch on everything inside of it because that would have taken a lot longer, but we've pretty much looked at 90% of what it can do. As you can see, it's pretty flexible and it's pretty crazy what you can do to just one simple sample. Don't forget, experimenting is the best way to learn stuff and to make your own cool and unique sounds. Hey guys, Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Feel free to leave a comment below and let me know what you thought. Don't forget, if you're interested in trying FL Studio for yourself, there's a link in the description to save 10% off all ImageLine software. When you're ready, click that next button, and I'll see you in the next lesson.